Hello, everybody. I'm Mike Sokol, and welcome to Live Sound Advice. How are you all today? We're okay. Very good. You're in Williamsport, Maryland, but we're streaming around the world. I think we're in 40 countries right now, which I think is really, really cool. We have a Twitter feed all set up, so we may have some questions come in. Hashtag Live Sound Advice. If you have questions anytime here, if you would raise your hand, we're going to have someone come around with a microphone. You don't have to have your face on screen if you don't want. But since I think we have 360 people signed up around the world, we want to also get your questions to them. So please feel free to just raise your hand. We've got a couple guys in the back that are going to run around. If they come up and stick a microphone in front of your face, that's okay. That's their job. I'm Mike Sokol. Just a couple of brief introductions. At the door over there is Jeremiah Leiter, the owner of Live Sound Co. and hosting this event. His brother Sam Leiter is running around here somewhere. He will, in fact, be doing the emceeing and the giveaways a little later. Harry Post will be doing over here. Yep, Harry is going to be doing all of our video switching. Caleb Eberly will be doing all of the Twitter feeds, so you guys can tweet right from your seats if you want. Go ahead, shock the boy. We also have Right Track Marketing. We've got Russ Groover and Mark McGuire that are in the back. We're going to have a couple of breaks. They'll be able to answer specific questions about some of the gear up here that we have, some like the Tectonic speakers. These things that look like TVs that aren't turned on are actually the speakers that we're playing through right now. Also, the digital mixing console over here, this Digico S21. So feel free to ask them any questions that you want. They are here for you specifically. Well, that's their job. Also, after the fact, if you have any questions that you did not get to ask or weren't answered, you think, go ahead and contact me, Mike at livesoundco.com, or Jeremiah at livesoundco.com, or just general inquiries about anything, info at livesoundco.com. So Live Soundco, we're a full-service integration and installation company. We install mostly on the East Coast, but we do large churches, large corporate installs, anything you need from audio to video to whatever. Plus, we do a lot of corporate media events, as well as outside concerts. So we can service anything that you guys need. So feel free to ask Jeremiah about any of that at break. So who is here for the gear? Right? You're all here for the gear, right? We are. So it's all about the gear. So we've assembled some really, really great technology. This is one of the things that I think is just really cool. When I was a tiny little kid, I was like playing with stuff and taking it apart and sometimes getting it back together. Now I get to play with really, really cool gear. I write about it for a lot of the magazines you may have read, EQ magazine and Pro Sound Web, Live Sound International. But mostly I just love playing with gear and talking to other engineers. So I'm going to go through real quickly the stuff that we have here today to play with. So we have some great gear sponsors. This is one of the fun things. It's like basically a Christmas at our office every week. There's always some cool piece of gear that's coming in. Digico has sent one of the coolest little consoles, I think, this S21 that you can see right behind me. This is all, it's just the slickest little console for, I think, medium to larger churches would be great for. Corporate events, guys that actually do sound mixing for a living. I think it's just terrific. We're going to be using it to show you frequency bracketing and equalization. I've also got a Cymatic Audio U-Track X32, and those of you that were at the last seminar we did, we use that to create virtual soundtracks. So the beauty of that is you can record your entire band, whatever it may be, praise team, whatever you've got, as completely separate tracks, and then you can use this later to learn how to better equalize and mix without making these guys play Proud Mary over 100 times in a row, which is always a bad thing. So Cymatic Audio has a whole line of products like this, but this just plugs right into the back of any of these X32 class machines. You hang a little hard drive recorder on it and hit the button and boom, you're running. Tectonic has brought these really cool speakers. I was surprised. I'd read about this for the last year, but these things that look like TV sets that are not turned on actually are the speakers that you're listening to me through, and really quite nice. So this is going to be an interesting thing for me. I always love learning new technology, so as you have questions, feel free to ask the guys in the back. I don't know that much about it. I've read the engineering excerpts, but we'll all discover this together, which I think is great. And my new favorite video company is Blackmagic Video. This is all of this switching. We are, with their technology, we are streaming around the world at 1080p, which is high definition video. If any of you guys, how many of you from churches, any of you? If you're considering doing netcasting at some future point in videos, basically what we have here is what you guys would be using. It seems to be really affordable, super solid, easy to work. I can control it with an iPhone app, which is, you know, boom, 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 right, Harry? There we go. He's going, what are you doing? What are you doing? Stop, stop. Look at him. He didn't do it. So yes, it's pretty slick, but we're loving this stuff. We have their ATEM video switcher, and we're using their HyperDeck recorder, which uses these cool little 2.5-inch solid-state drives. We're loving it. Also, we have some EV products in here, some Electrovoice microphones, which I've used for decades and decades and decades. We're going to use that to discuss about kick drum miking and that sort of thing. Okay, everybody ready to dig in? Okay. Okay, so before you can understand equalization, you got to really understand a little bit about the physics of sound, how it actually works. I'm just one of these guys that have played with this forever and ever and ever. And so it's one of these things that as I gathered a new piece of a gear or I had a new microphone or whatever, I would start to say, what do I need to do to make it sound good? It's all about the sound to me. It's not just the technology. If you can make it sound good, then it's useful. So it really comes down to how do we hear and what are we really hearing? So if you look here, can you see the screen up there? What does that look like? Well, it looks a little goofy, right? But guess what? This was serious business in World War I. So the Topophone was invented in the 1880s, and this has big, it looks like megaphones hooked on the ears, basically to expand your ears out. It was used in World War I to help figure out where artillery was coming from, because what it did was exaggerated the stereo. Isn't that the coolest thing? So even back in the 1800s, they were trying to figure out how to hear things better. I just think it's just the coolest thing. I want one. So if any of you guys see it, please send it to me. Let me know. I just can you imagine showing up at a party like that? That would be great stuff. Oh well, that's geek fun. Sorry. Let's talk about notes. So I'm an adjunct professor at Shenandoah Conservatory, and I try out these ideas on my students. So I think this is a different way of thinking about sound and how it works, and I think it'll help you. So the biggest thing that we have to consider is how long the waveforms are. That is, when you make a sound, it actually looks like waves on an ocean. And these waves can be separated by so many feet apart. So the key here is, how do we figure out, how does an instrument know what notes to play? So if we go back and look at our tuba here, you can see that there's a lot of turns and bends in this thing. And if we were to unwrap this thing and stretch it out, how long do you imagine it would be? It's around 30 feet long or so of tubing wrapped up. So guess how long the waveform is of a tuba note? 30 feet. Isn't that the coolest thing? So they make very, very long wavelengths, and they need to have big speakers to reproduce them. Now let's consider something like the piccolo or a flute. How long is a flute? Foot, 2 feet long, right? Guess how long the waveforms are coming from the notes of a flute? They're about the length of a flute, a couple of feet long. So the idea here of this is you can look at an instrument, how it's laid out, and you can kind of predict what we call its fundamental notes are. So we're going to, as we talk about equalization, we're going to talk about the fundamental notes, and we're also going to talk about these overtones or harmonics. So here's a little chart that I made up that shows us the wavelengths of various frequencies. So you can see really, really low notes. And when I say low notes, I am not talking about something that's soft. I mean big bassy notes. A bass note, 30 hertz, which is about as low as we normally can reproduce in a sound system, will be on the order of 37 feet long. I mean, really, really big things. Whereas the highest notes that we can hear, if you look over on the lower right, 12 to 16 kilohertz, it's hardly an inch long. And so this is why when we play these things back through speakers, the bass notes need to have great big speakers to be able to reproduce those really, really long wavelengths. Whereas a little radio or whatever that has a speaker this big, guess what kind of sound it can reproduce? Just those tiny little high notes. And part of your equalization that you've got to figure out is, what are you playing through? What kind of instrument do you have? What sounds are you starting with that you want to be able to manipulate? So again, bass sounds have these very, very long wavelengths, up to 30 feet long or so, and require physically large speakers, 15, 18, 21-inch speakers to reproduce them in the room mix. And treble sounds have these very short wavelengths of a few inches long, and they need tweeters or horns to be able to reproduce them. Have any of you guys ever tried to send a high-frequency treble sound through something like a woofer? You know, just a bass speaker, and it doesn't work very well because the speaker is physically too large. It cannot reproduce those tiny little frequencies. Whereas if you go the other way and try to reproduce bass notes out of a tiny little speaker, guess what happens? Kind of burns up quite rapidly, right? It can't reproduce those very, very long wavelengths. So let's talk a little bit about frequency control. So one of the most important things that you can learn when you're learning to equalize instruments or voices is what frequencies that you've got to work with. So if you notice here, here's a chart that I made up. I used to do a bunch of mixing for the Maryland Symphony Orchestra, and I got so tired of talking to the various musicians about frequencies, and they kept talking about notes. And I said, I'm going to do a chart that does both of these things. So you can see, if you look kind of at the top of the chart, you'll see that a piccolo, which is a very short little instrument, can only do the lowest notes that it can do are somewhere around 500 hertz or so. Whereas you go further down the frequency spectrum, down towards the bottom, tubas reach almost as far down as bass guitars. And again, they're making these really, really long wavelengths. And things like pipe organs, they can go. Have you ever seen pipe organs with the big pipes? They'll have 32-foot pipes. Guess what frequencies the 32-foot pipes want to reproduce? That 30 hertz, 32-foot long kind of things, right? Now, I think one of the most important things that you can learn how to do is to set what we call the high-pass filter. Now, some of your consoles may have something that's called a low-cut filter. Cutting the lows is really the same as passing the highs. Different manufacturers will call it different things, but the vast majority of these guys nowadays call them high-pass filters. Any of you remember turntables from back in the olden days, right? And they would have a rumble filter on there. That's essentially what this is. So the rumble filter, this high-pass filter, allows you to get rid of these lowest frequencies. So if we look back at our other chart here, you can see that there's something that shows us the lowest frequency that a flute can do is like 200 and some hertz. Okay, now again, a hertz is a cycles per second, and it's a fairly high note. It cannot make any bass because how big is the flute? Only 2 feet long. Now, one of the most important aspects of learning how to mix is to get rid of anything that instrument cannot do in the mix. So if you think about it, if you look at something like a flute and you're listening to its mic, if you hear bass coming in the flute mic, is that coming from your flute? No. Where is it coming from? Something else. It could be the bass guitar, it could be air conditioner rumble, it could be any of a variety of things. But the key here is you want to get rid of it, because all that does is just muddies up your mix. So this is this concept of what I call frequency bracketing. That is, if an instrument can't do it, throw it away. And so a chart like this will allow you to just kind of look down here and say, okay, this guy right here, let's say an electric guitar or acoustic guitar, the lowest note that it can do is 80 couple hertz. That's low E on a guitar. And so what I'm going to do is engage this high-pass filter maybe around 80 hertz or so. And that gets rid of this super low bottom end that may be rumbling in the mix. A lot of times before I touch any EQ at all, the first thing I do is just set the high-pass filters in the appropriate places that make sense. Just go in there and just say, okay, vocals, another thing. You can see that the lowest note that a human vocalist can do is somewhere around 80-ish or so. So this is why we go ahead and set a high-pass filter around 80 hertz. It just makes the most sense. Now, there will be times if you have a singer that has a very, very deep bass voice that you may end up having to add the bottom end. So for instance, if you're doing old style gospel quartet, where the guy's got the bass singer just doing that do-whack-a-mow, that stuff. So guess what? In those cases, we give them a kick drum microphone and give them as much bass boost as we possibly can, because that's the style of the music. Whereas normal singers are never going to be singing down on the bottom end, so we're going to change that high-pass filter. Luckily, all these modern digital consoles are completely variable as to where you set that. So back on your slide here, you use your high-pass filter to get rid of any low notes the instrument can't produce. You use the chart to find the lowest note it can make and set the high-pass filter just a little lower. So, you know, I generally take flutes and fifes and stuff. I set those around 400 hertz or so for the high-pass filter. The other thing that you can do you ever have like anyone have piano players or keyboard players in whatever they're doing? They sometimes don't play well with bass guitarists. And why is that? Because of the left hand thing, right? So you'll have a piano player that's going boom, 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 doing that big left hand. Now, if he's playing all by himself, he's doing a treble up here, he's doing bump, 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 bump down here. Whoops. Sorry, guys. There we go. I'm tapping my phone. Whoops. What will happen is if he's doing the same thing that the bass guitarist is doing, they get in each other's way. So if the pianist is playing all by himself, what I will do is not engage the high-pass filter on the keyboard or the piano and let him do the bass. But if I now have a bass player at the same time that's going to interfere, I don't want to have to tell the piano player to stop playing his left hand. So guess what do I do with the high-pass filter? I just engage the high-pass filter, and what I've done is I've really turned down the guy's left hand, and he doesn't even know it. Which means he can play like he normally plays, but now what I've done is I've created this space in the mix for the bass guitar to live. And so this idea, this really advanced idea of frequency carving. That is, what you're trying to do is pick two different instruments, carve out a hole in the one instrument, and then let the other one live in there so the two of them can live together. So we'll do much more on that in a little bit. Also, the other thing to note is when we talk about fundamental frequencies of an instrument, we are not talking about overtones. So these overtones are these little buzzes that happen on top of what we're doing that allows us, to gives us the instrument kind of its quality of what it sounds like. So you know, really, the high frequency content can be manipulated both by the musicians and by the channel strip EQ. So let's go ahead. We're going to have an experiment here. Oh, let's see. Bump, bump, bump. There we go. So there's also something that's called a low pass filter. You can think of that as a lets the sound below a certain thing. It's kind of like a high cut filter. You can get rid of any high sounds out of an instrument. So let's assume that you've got a mic on a kick drum. Does everyone know what kind of notes a kick drum makes? It's this big, low, boom, boom, boom. Should you hear any little sizzles coming out of the kick drum mic? No. If you do, guess what that means? Something else is leaking into the kick drum mic. So what I will generally do then is get rid of the high frequencies off of there. Anything above 8 or 10,000, just throw it away, because if it's sneaking into the kick drum mic, it's certainly not kick drum. So we'll do these brackets where we just kind of adjust the high end and the low end of it just to get rid of things to prep the instrument. This is before I've touched any EQ. So again, bass guitars really don't have any sound above 10K. Kick drum doesn't really have any sound above 8 kilohertz. How do you really know how this works? You use your ears. You know, I tell everybody that the best set of instruments that you have are your own ears and your brain that knows how to interpret it. So this is something that's a ongoing thing for me to study. I mean, I study this constantly as to what different things sound like, why we're changing things within the mix to make myself a better engineer and a better player, really. So again, setting the high and low pass filters around this instrument spectrum is what I call frequency bracketing, this upper and lower brackets. And you're creating this window of frequencies that a channel will accept reduces a lot of the sound that's just leaking into everything else. And that's half the battle right there. It's just picking those frequencies that the thing wants to do. So I'm going to ask Jeff Talton to come up and start with a bass guitar for us all. And what he's going to do is I'm going to ask him to play it several different ways so that we can figure out what we need to do to equalize things. So now you're going to be, you're going to sit right there? You can be right there. Let's see. Hang on one second. Let me get you in camera. You can sit right there. There we go. Beautiful. Look at that, man. Okay, bring him up on screen. There he is. Say hi to everybody. Hi, everybody. Okay, well, you're not, they can't hear you. You have to speak with your bass guitar. I'm going to spin around here, and I'm going to turn you on. The first thing we're going to do is I'm going to ask him to play. He has a control to be able to turn this thing down. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn him on right now. So go ahead and give me a little bit of bass, if you would, for a second. Yeah, turn your volume up. Okay, so what he's going to do is just going to turn down. He has a tone control, so he can control those high frequencies. And what I'm asking him to do is go ahead and play with his fingers first. So he's not going to slap or pop. This is kind of old school bass guitar. It's kind of 60s style. So can you go ahead and play a little for us? Just anything you like. A few scales. Tone down? Leave with the tone down, right. So what you notice about this, there's really no high frequencies in this at all. It really is what we would call sine waves, that sort of thing. Can you go ahead and start and turn your tone control up on this right now? Just crank it all the way up and play the same thing. See what he's done? Yeah. See what he's done on this? So he's actually changed that. Now, musicians will have an idea of where they want this to fit in the mix. And he's also playing with his fingers. So you want to play with a pick or slap it? Like he says, oh, of course he's got a pick. Of course. So play with your pick now, if you would.
A lot of bass players are disgruntled. Oh,
they're disgruntled. I know. Now, can you go ahead and slap and pop a little bit? can you hold just a sec? Okay. Thank you very much, Jeff. Sounds great. Now, let's go back to a slide here. And as you notice, as he was changing how his playing style, it completely changed the characteristics of what that bass guitar sounded like. So what I try to do is work around what the musician's intent is. I am trying to honor what the musician wants and also the genre of the music that we happen to be doing. So again, I'm going to go and show you a little bit. Now I'm going to go over, I'm going to let him play with the treble turned up, and I'm going to go over on the equalization on that channel and actually start changing what it sounds like for everybody else. So let me see if I can get that up on screen. Give me 1 second. There we go. So here we are. Let's see. I'm looking. There we go. There's our bass. There's this guy right here. So what I can do right now is I can engage the low pass filter. So go ahead and play for just like you were doing. Just slap and pop if you like. See what I'm doing? I can also go. Whoops, I got to engage low pass. So you can see if I start throwing the lows away, what happens to my bass guitar? But the band falls apart, Jeff says. That's right, man. And as I move this to the left, you can see what's happening, 50, 60, 70, 80 hertz. So that's throwing away the bottom end. As I go to the top, I can start rolling those highs off. Until, guess what, I have nothing but the pure bass. Now, for you guys at home who've got little speakers on your computer, if you're listening to it, you may not hear much because guess what? Your little speakers can't reproduce the bass notes. This is why we all recommend subwoofers at home. Okay, thank you very much, Jeff. I think, hang on 1 sec. Let me just double check. Yes, we're done with you for right now, but we'll ask you to come back in a bit. Okay, let's have a little hand for Jeff. Yes. Okay, so again, we're going to come back in a little bit. We're going to have both a kick drum and the bass guitar together so we can kind of work on making that stuff fit together in the mix. Okay, so now, again, here's the idea of mixing for this sort of thing. If you know each voice and instrument needs to have a specific EQ to make it fit within the mix. Much more on these techniques later in the next webinar, but here's the basics. And this is a description of what each frequency sounds like, okay? So let's start with the top and work our way down. And I'll show you a little bit on a handheld microphone. So sheen is like this super high frequencies, like these super sizzly things. It's kind of the metallic sound of a cymbal or kind of the squeak of an acoustic guitar. And that's usually in the 12 kilohertz to 16 kilohertz range. So when I say kilohertz, I mean thousands of hertz, and it's way, way up there. Tiny little waveforms, only an inch or so long, and so they're easily lost and absorbed in rooms. But it's what gives kind of this air on the top of it. In fact, Mackie used to call that, they had an air button years ago that just did a couple of dB boost at 14 kilohertz. Sibilance is this 5 kilohertz to 8 kilohertz sizzle, like that. Or this extra S-ing. I've done this for years and years and years, and I've found that where sibilance sometimes comes from is false teeth. So sometimes I'll do presentations and I'll have older preachers, and they're They'll be whistling like crazy, and it's because of dentures. The other ones, the other side of the coin here that sometimes whistle a lot and have the sibilance are beauty contestants. Because guess what? Veneers can whistle like crazy too. There are, in fact, a number of consoles that have got a special little circuit in there, and they call it, for lack of a better name, a de-esser, D-E-E-S-S-E-R, and guess what its job is to? Get rid of the excessive essing. And it's actually a little tunable thing that you can go in and put your headphones on, hit the button, tune it in for maximum S that you hear, and then get rid of it. Okay? Presence is this 3,000 to 5,000 hertz thing. And this was kind of like the days of Jimi Hendrix. So when he would take his wah-wah pedal and mash it down 3/4 of the way, he was boosting the living daylights out of like 3.5 or 4 kilohertz. And this kind of makes the sound jump out in the mix a little more. So if you need to hear the sound in the mix better, you may not need to turn that instrument up. You may just need to give it a little more boost at 4 kilohertz. Vocal intelligibility is generally in the 800 to 2,000 hertz range. If any of you guys have ever seen any military communications, they only worry about sending 300 to 3,000 hertz. They really don't care about the things above that and below that. But what you'll find is that in male singers, these are the telephone frequencies. Around 800 or 1,000 hertz are where you can understand the words. And in the 2,000 hertz range for female singers is where you can, again, boost the intelligibility of it without necessarily turning it up. We also have, we start getting down into some of the problem frequencies. So this nasal honk is that generally 400 to, yeah, he's got to get me on screen, is generally 400 to 600 hertz. And a lot of times we have this same thing that happens in kick drums and in smaller speakers. And I think it's because 500 hertz has about a 2-foot wavelength. And a kick drum that's 24 inches will tend to have this extra resonance at 500 or 600 hertz. I think that's why we subtract 600 hertz out of a 24-inch kick, because of that extra standing wave in there that we don't like. Smaller speaker cabinets that don't have proper insulation inside of them and sound damping will, in fact, do the same sort of thing. A lot of sound, tubbiness can come from things that are tub-shaped. So if you sing in the bathtub or in a small hallway, a lot of times you'll hear this going on, and things like acoustic guitars, which are tub-shaped, can develop the same kind of 200, 300 hertz kind of whomp that you need to carve out of them to make them sound correct. Boomy sounds are generally in the 80 hertz to 200 hertz range. And this is kind of like the big bass that you hear when you slam a door in a parking deck. Deepest bass is generally in the 30 to 80 hertz range, and this is where bass guitars and kick drums live, down there in the bottom. This is the stuff that we love. So I'm going to go on some channel strip EQ for you. Now, I don't have an analog console with me today. I've got a digital console, but you can do exactly the same thing on a analog and in any decent analog console. Let me go ahead. I'm going to kill my headset mic. Let me see if I've got this up. I think I do. I'm going to kill my headset. Okay, so right now, let me get up on this mic. Okay, you got me okay, Harry? Okay, so you can hear that this mic has got a lot more bass in it than the other one, right? So what's the first thing that we would like to be able to do? We're going to start getting rid of some of these low frequencies. So let's engage the high pass. There we go. Dum, 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 dum. My bad. Too many buttons there. Hey, hey, hey. I know my problem. 1 second. Too many instruments here. So now I'm going to start getting rid of some of these low frequencies. See, do you hear how bassy my voice sounds in this room right now? So what I'm going to do, I'll tell you what. Hang on 1 second, Harry. Let me get this guy up on screen. There we go. I'm sorry. So what we're going to do right now is I'm going to go ahead over here and start getting rid of these lowest frequencies. So there's 40 hertz, 60 hertz, 70 hertz. And you can see once I start getting around 80 hertz, a lot of those basic things start going away, right? Now I could go too far and start making 150 hertz or 200 hertz or 300 hertz or 400 hertz until there's nothing left of me, right? Let's put it back down around 80 or so. So let's get rid of those bottom ends. So let's go ahead and start with some of these high frequencies. So here is this 15. I'm going to get rid of some of them right here, but I'm going to go ahead and boost this 12, 15 kilohertz frequency range. And you can hear I'm starting to create some sizzle on the top end. I'm also going to go down. Let's take it and increase the sibilance frequencies. There's around 8 kilohertz in my voice. You see how sizzly and brittle my voice sounds? I'm going to now take it down to, let's take it down to these presence frequencies. There's right around 3.5, 4 kilohertz. And hear how it's like making my voice jump out in the mix. If I come down further here into the 1 kilohertz range, right now these are the communication frequencies. Doesn't that kind of sound like I'm talking on a telephone? I'm also going to go down into, let's go down into the nasal frequencies. So this is kind of squawky. Yeah, here we go. I can actually narrow that out. There is a really obnoxious 500 hertz, right? Let's go down where you start getting down to the boomy frequencies of a couple hundred hertz. So here the singing in the bathtub, doo-doo, or the boxy frequencies, doo-doo-doo-doo-doo, until we get down into these bottom 100 hertz frequencies down here. And we can make it really, really boomy if you want. Ha, ha, ha. Yeah, there we go. So the question becomes, what do you do with something like this? You have, I like to think of this as both the power to create and the power to destroy. You can do all kinds of nasty things with this. And this is just an Electrovoice RE510 as a condenser microphone. So it's got a fairly flat response with a good many highs. I might put a little sizzle in it up here. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of the lowest bassy things on here. And depending on the style of music, I may go add a little bit of 3K presence. How to figure out what to do with this. So I'm going to kill this mic and go back to my headset and get back on camera here. 1 second. So what do we do with this? How do we make a decision of what to do with a voice? So a lot of this has to depend on the genre of the music that you're working with and also the artist or singer that you may be doing. So let's say that you have somebody that's got this extra sizzly stuff in their voice, you know, and some producer may call it jelly beans, or you might be like crispy bacon or whatever, but maybe they've got this horrible rasp in their voice. Should you go in and just get rid of it? Should you just start carving it out on their thing? Maybe, maybe not. What if you were doing sound for like Stevie Nicks or Joe Cocker, or any of these great artists, Kenny Rogers, any of these guys that have this burnt, crisp vocal cord thing? How long do you think you would be an engineer for them if you started dialing out that? If you were doing it for Rod Stewart, guess what his producer would probably ask you to do? Crank up as much as you can, because guess what? That's part of his signature. There's got to be some sermon in here somewhere about why human beings like imperfections. But we do. If a singer or an instrument has a special little extra problem, boosting it makes it sound better. I don't know why. Have any of you ever played a guitar and you hear it kind of squeak a little bit? It's the best sound in the world when there's this tiny little squeak on the guitar neck. It sounds so real. One of my favorite engineers in the world is Al Schmidt. I don't know how many Grammy Awards he's won now. I guess he's had to build a whole new fireplace mantle for this thing. He will do jazz recordings, and there's stand-up bass, and there'll be string buzz on the stand-up bass. Now, he's got $1 million worth of gear with him. He can retake this thing as many times as he wants, but he decided to leave the string buzz in because, guess what? It sounds absolutely real and authentic. And the same thing, too, when you're getting into producing at higher levels. For instance, I love artists like Tom Petty, who bend notes but never quite reach it. You know what I mean? He's bending and bending and bending, and every time I may have heard the song 1,000 times, and I'm going, oh, Tom, you can make it this time. You know, you really can. But guess what? He never makes it. There's this little thing that we tend to like, artists struggling in front of us. I don't know why, but I like it. I much, much prefer that to some super technical static performance that sounds like it came out of a computer. It just doesn't make me happy. It doesn't make me feel good. So again, every musical genre has the sonic signature that's accepted as correct. Let's talk about something as simple as a kick drum. So how many of you remember music back from the 50s? There's a few guys my age, right, out here. 60s? 70s? Nobody wants to admit. Okay, all right, don't admit. Okay, but if you listen to music, especially before there was this rock and roll stuff, back in the 50s, there were drum kits, but the kick drum was kind of this little tiny pop, 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 pop. Then you had rock and roll heavy metal acts, and you had things like Led Zeppelin and AC/DC and that kind of stuff. In that case, this kick and bass guitar became huge and in your face. And what they would do at that time, they would go and take and have the kick do this real slappy sound. And in fact, it didn't really sound much like a bottomly kick that we do nowadays. It actually sounded like something like wood hitting it. And in fact, that's how we created it. I remember back in the 60s, we would put wood beaters on the kick drums, and sometimes we would tape a credit card or a quarter on the bass on the kick drum head, you know, and then the beater would just slap that thing and make a big impact. And that's because at the time, the bass guitar did the bottom end. So if you look back in the 60s, bass guitar cabinets were huge. I mean, they had these big 15s, 18s. I remember guys having 30-inch woofers around here. So can a 30-inch woofer make any high frequencies? No, it cannot. It only can make lows. So I'm a firm believer that the kick drum and the bass guitar form one instrument played by two different people. So part of this is this idea of, as the bass guitar has evolved, the kick drum has evolved in the opposite direction. So think 60s, where you have lots of bass guitar, boom, 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 and lots of smack, smack, smack from your kick drum. What happened in the 70s and 80s? The 80s came around, yes came around. What did bass players start doing? Slapping, popping, playing through little speakers, right? And so they got rid of the bass. They were providing the slap. So the kick drum needs to do what? The exact opposite. So in that case, what would happen is the bass player would now be doing slaps and pops, and the kick drum, we would equalize it to get rid of this extra bump on the higher frequencies and make it more boomy. Snares have changed too. So you can sit there and look at from the 60s, and you'd have Led Zeppelin in the late 60s, early 70s, with these huge, huge parade snares that had these big, deep sounds. And they finally started migrating up to those little piccolo snares, which I don't care for a whole lot, but you know, it's a popular sound. And now sometimes I've done music for Jamaican groups, and they have these things they're called firecracker snares. Man, they look like the size of a bongo. Man, they're loud. Now, I could, if I really wanted to, redo the sound of a band with a piccolo snare, and I could make it sound like a big, deep rope parade snare if I wanted to. But that's not correct, because the music that they're doing needs that tiny little piccolo snare. Whereas my comfort food, you know, my musically formative years can be defined as Led Zeppelin 1, 2, and 3. So I would automatically revert to Zeppelin kind of drum kits, but I cannot do that if I'm doing a more modern Journey sound or a modern 90s or 2000s, any of these other things. I have to go with that genre. And I do this by listening and learning what each musical decade is supposed to sound like. Now, here's an interesting thing. You don't need a computer to practice equalization. But you can do it with something like a simple little virtual sound check program. So I've got a Cymatic audio card. So they have a U-Track X32 card that plugs right into X32 M32 class console and allows you to do multi-track recording to a USB drive. That also allows you to play the stuff back. So I'm going to just play with this for just a minute. Give me a second to get this up on screen.